Coach Gary here. I'm talking today about independent thinking versus learned helplessness. Now, those are two expressions. You've certainly heard the first one, maybe not the second one. And those are two expressions that are related to each other but have somewhat different meanings. They're almost opposites in a way. The first expression, independent thinking, is something that we've heard so many times, all the time, really, as JWs. And it was defined a certain way, and it would have to be categorized as loaded language, probably like no other expression, because they're two normal words. It's a normal expression that you'll hear pretty often out here in the regular real world, but the JWs use it completely differently. And that's what loaded language is all about. It's normal words and expressions that are used to indoctrinate, to condition, and to implant a certain mindset and to control the group and hopefully even control the fact that you want them to stay in. And so the JWs use that expression completely differently the way it's normally used. The way it's normally used, when you do the research on it, it's almost 100% of the time, it's talking about a very positive quality that we all should cultivate. And if we haven't before, we should learn how to. And it doesn't matter how smart we are, doesn't matter what we do for a living, how educated we are, we really need to think independently. It benefits us as individuals, it benefits our relationships, makes us a better employee, a better employer, a better entrepreneur, a more positive contributor to society, a more creative person. I mean, you think of like Thomas Edison. Do you think he was an independent thinker? You bet he was. Was it bad? Look at all the things that he invented because not just because he was an independent thinker, but he was also very creative and had a brilliant mind. But the point is that there are nothing but benefits to independent thinking. Absolutely nothing but benefits. The only other time that you might see a different, let's say, use of the expression that is sort of getting toward the way JWs and perhaps other high control groups use it, but not necessarily that far, is what I found in just a very low percentage of the time of my research has to do with fundamentalist religious groups who look at things in a very black and white, very narrow way. They're not necessarily high control, but that's what they do. And when they use the expression independent thinking in any kind of negative way, they're really just talking about allowing God into our lives, allowing God to help us make decisions, or my God is my co-pilot or whatever. So they're just basically saying, it's not that we don't think for ourselves, but you want to seed your thinking to God's way and learn from Him. Okay, so assuming that that's correct, it's a very, very small percentage of the research I've done, and I don't even look into it past a sentence or two or a page or two because I just get tired of it. And I know where it's going. So vast majority of the time, close to all the time, independent thinking is thought of as a positive thing. And I'll tell you, my relationship with the term goes back to number one, to an experience I had when I was first in. I was 15 when I came in, 16 when I got baptized. My parents were not in. None of my family ever has been. And there was one time when I was 16 years old that I had a dilemma at work. I worked in the men's department of a clothing store called Orbax in Westbury, New York. And in the month of May, one year, well, of course, every year in the United States, May includes Father's Day and Memorial Day. Memorial Day being a patriotic holiday. And they're usually a couple of weeks apart, but it's the same month and it's a season, It's considered the de facto beginning of summer. So one of the things that we were required to do was to wear this straw boater, one of those hats that it wasn't actually made of straw, but it was plastic, but it was like a straw boater that was decorated with all around it with red, white, and blue colors. I don't think there was any American flag depicted upon it, because if there was, that would have made the decision a lot more clear. But it was clearly patriotic feelings that it was trying to engender. It was red, white, and blue, and it said something about Father's Day, so it kind of got both things in there with one one hat, right? So the idea is that we were going to have to wear this during this week or two. And oh my God, what a decision! What am I going to do? I better talk to the elders because that's what I did with everything. I was immature, and my parents were not in, and they anyway, that's another story. But so I talked to my book study conductor back when we had such things, and he was one of the elders, and I laid it out, and he said, "Gary, how old are you now?" 16. So 16. Hmm. Don't you think you're old enough to be able to figure this stuff out on your own? You really need me to tell you what the right thing to do about this is? I mean, I'll show you what the publications say about it, I guess, if you want, but you can find that yourself. And what, why do you need to learn to think for yourself? You're almost a grown man. You're a big boy. Well, that hurt me actually. It sort of offended me, and it hurt me personally. I went home with my tail between my legs, thinking like, "Great, I still don't know what to do." And now I'm told that I'm being a baby, and like, what the heck is that all about? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he was right. I know the answer to this, and it's not necessarily the same answer that somebody else is going to come to. And I made my decision accordingly, and I was grateful for that. To this day, I'm grateful to that for that. Well, the thing is that that was an unusual experience, I think you would admit, because for the most part, elders love to have their egos stroked and to be able to be the answer man and to tell you what to do. Well, it just wasn't that way where I came in. So I learned from that to not let other people do my thinking for me. And so the other part of my relationship with the term is how years later I just started seeing more and more of this castigation of independent thinking and people that indulge in it, and people just accepted it and would talk about, oh yeah, we got to avoid independent thinking. And I thought, wait a minute. Well, first of all, I never taught my kids that way. I always taught them, this is how the organization works. We have elders, we have the governing body, we have the literature. And so by all means, reference those things, go to them with questions if you have them. No problem. I mean, at that time, this is what I thought. But don't ever let somebody think for you. If let's say one elder says something to you that seems like a little bit goofy, ask me about it. Do your own research, or maybe ask another elder. Get a second opinion. Don't just follow just what some guy said just because he's got a title. That's why I taught my kids. Well, unfortunately, they're still in and I'm out, so they do follow that. If they told them tomorrow you should call your dad and you can, they would probably do it because they were told to, not because they think independently. So independent thinking is very much stifled in that organization. But at this point, maybe, well, throughout my life really, but mainly in the last 10 or 15 years that I was still in, and I would hear people saying these things, I thought, I have my own brain. We all have our own brains. Every animal has its own brain. And it only works for the individual that has that brain, right? It doesn't work for other people or other organisms. And for that matter, other organisms and people's brains don't work for us as individuals. It doesn't work that way. Our brain keeps our blood flowing, it keeps our lungs breathing. It tells us it's time to go get a sandwich and it'll help us decide what kind of sandwich we want to make. We as physical creatures, of course, we think independently. That's the only way our brains work is independent of other people's brains. But the idea of independent thinking, the way the JWs define it, is that it's when we think independently and we don't follow the leadership of the organization. And the fact is that leadership is making every effort to make us think a certain way, certain things, to behave a certain way, to accept this as moral, this as immoral, this as right, this is wrong, and to not think for yourself in any of those areas. Never ever make. Now, of course, all of us would make decisions about like when it's time to leave for work. We have a job that maybe has a body of knowledge associated with it that is not common to the world in general. Like I was a computer programmer for years, so I know things that most people don't know about that. whereas a doctor would know a lot of things about medicine that I don't know. That's the way the world works, right? So we would decide I'm going to work today, make a left turn here, right turn there. Here's the office, go in, you know. So, and we're learning, researching things in books, and we're making decisions that are job related. We're not going through our day thinking, what would the elders say about this? What would they say about that? But if we depend upon the magazines and the elders and the governing body for everything having to do with morality, activity, you know, like a congregational type of activity, um, morals, that's where independent thinking goes right out the window by design, and it's a way again of controlling people, which gets to and so what we're going to talk in a few minutes about how to get past that because we certainly don't think that way anymore, but those tendencies can still be within us. But it gets to the other half of the discussion, which is about learned helplessness. Now, that is not a a high control group design expression. It is not loaded language. It's actually in the world of psychology, it's a fairly common expression, and it is in the general vocabulary. It's just that you don't hear it that often. So first, we want to talk about how psychology, the world of psychology, uses that term. I'm not sure when it was first coined, that expression, or when the research was first done on the phenomenon, but it was certainly. I'm almost sure it was within my lifetime, not too many years ago. But it was observed by certain researchers, people that became researchers for this, that certain animals exhibit behaviors of giving up in certain contexts where they feel that they have no control over, or they've learned that they have no control over their environment, and they just sort of give up in that context. So, having observed that behavior, they decided to do an experiment on using dogs. And what they did was that they created a room with two separate chambers, and the two chambers were separated by a very low to the ground barrier that any dog could easily jump over. And the dogs were kept in harnesses to limit their movements somewhat, and to make them observable. And the thing is, with the one room, it was equipped with a mechanism to deliver mild electric shocks, not to the point where the animal would be electrocuted or will be unbearable pain, but just enough to make them uncomfortable. Okay, so when I read about this study, the first thing I thought of was I hope that they weren't cruel to those poor animals, but I don't think they were because of the way they described it. So anyway, so that's the way the rooms were equipped. There were three different groups of dogs. The first group did not receive any electric shocks, and they just went freely between one room and the other, you know, whatever. If they wanted to leave, they left. The second group received the electric shocks, but there was also a panel that they learned by themselves to press that would stop the electric shocks from occurring. The third group, there was no ability to do that. The electric shocks it just happened when they happened, and there was nothing they could do about it. So the first two groups, the result of the experiment was that the first two groups jumped over the barrier. In the case of the second group of dogs, they jumped over it whenever they received an electric shock. They're like, I'm not doing this. They jumped over the barrier. Um, Even though letting go of the panel would cause the electric shock to repeat itself, but they learned that they wanted to get out of here, so they got out into the next room. The third group that had no control, and that's the key thing, is that they had no control over their environment except to leave, learned how to live with the electric shocks. They did not try to cross the barrier. They just assumed that there's nothing I can do about this. So that's interesting. That's just dogs. But as people, it's a psychological concept. Um, we can learn to not help ourselves anymore. That's called learned helplessness. And that is definitely what high control groups like the JWs practice, is learned helplessness. They would never use that term, but that's what they do. They teach us how to not help ourselves in certain categories of thinking and behavior. So in the research I did, and it was pretty extensive, the things that cause learned helplessness in the traditional psychological sense, not in how it relates to a high control group, but in the sense that a person might um, not not solve problems anymore, not get out of situations that are harmful, like even domestic violence situations. They might do nothing about it because they're so used to it. There are about a half a dozen categories of things that cause learned helplessness, and those and these are more prominent and more pernicious uh, when a person experiences this younger, and especially when it's a pattern of growing up. Abuse, childhood neglect, domestic violence, natural disasters, extreme trauma, all of those things can cause learned helplessness in the sense of not helping ourselves get out of bad situations, a situation where we're being neglected, where we're being abused. Even as adults, we tend to think that there's nothing I can do about it, so we don't do anything about it. What I thought was interesting about that list, though, is that there was another item that was not actually expressed as part of that list. It was just a little bit farther down in the same articles, and as a sort of an afterthought, almost like a footnote, and that is overparenting. Now, I think the main difference between overparenting and all the items on that list is that overparenting is not necessarily done, with bad motives. Someone that overparents probably loves their children. They just don't realize that they're overdoing it. And so what I mean is, I don't mean severe discipline. What I'm talking about is, or what the articles were talking about is, like forcing decisions on a child, never letting them to make decisions, never teaching them to make decisions on their own, discouraging creativity, just putting up barriers to learning how to solve your own problems and to get out of bad situations. So it's interesting that that was mentioned separately from it because, again, we wouldn't think of overparenting as negative in terms of the motive, but in terms of the effect, it can be just as bad. I mean, the things that self that learned helplessness can contribute to or turn into are high blood pressure, cardiovascular problems, depression. Um, uh, I mean, there's a whole long list of things, of physical symptoms that can result from a life of learned helplessness. So, as it relates to a high control group, let's just focus on that over parenting thing. Again, the parent that overparents is not doing it with a bad motive, not doing it in an evil way. They're just they're just not allowing us to think for ourselves and to make our own decisions and to be creative thinkers and to learn how to solve problems. Isn't that what high control groups like the JWs do? Everything that has to do with morals or making personal decisions, especially as they affect activity that might be associated with a congregation, uh, all those things or questioning something, having a question about the Bible that we all right, you can do personal research on it, but at some point you got to realize that the society's publications are just the be all and end all, and even if you don't understand it, just accept it for now, and don't ever go outside the organization's publications with a question. So in all those different ways, we learn to be helpless in a sense. Again, not related to our job, let's say, where we're learning things that other people don't know, or whether to buy this house or not. But in terms of moral decisions, fashion choices, music choices, movie choices, what are we going to do with our time? Uh, should we get married or not? What practices are okay in my own bedroom? All these things, we are helpless to make our own decisions, and so we learn to be helpless. So now, what do we do about that? Now that we're out, we certainly know that independent thinking is never a bad thing. It's always very, very positive thing. It's something that we should develop. And we certainly know that learning to be helpless is never going to be a good thing. But the problem is that we may have patterns of thinking where we still just are not prone to making our own decisions. Now, again, it's fine to go and ask somebody, maybe a friend, a coworker, or go to the library or whatever. It's always appropriate to ask somebody for advice. Um, but it's just never learning to think for ourselves, to make our own decisions. Always having somebody to make a decisions for us. That can be a pattern in our life, and we need to recognize that. And it's not just decisions that are related to that organization. It's not just a decision, should I go to the Kingdom Hall today? We know we're not going to do that. Should I go back to the organization? Uh, what should I believe about this? What should I believe about that? It's not just that. It's anything that we will potentially learn that has nothing to do with that organization. A job decision, a career decision, or a decision, or do we want to go to another house of worship, or are we going to have an atheistic pattern of thinking? That's all up to us. It's completely up to us. So if we ever find ourselves just kind of sitting around thinking like, I don't know what to do, I don't know if I should go for that promotion at work. Maybe I'm better off just making what I make, and that's okay. Just recognize that as perhaps an incidence of learned helplessness, and help yourself. And there are various people in this group to reach out to learn how to do that better. Not just me, but there's life coaches galore in these groups. So talking, for instance, to a life coach is very different from therapy. And therapy has its own place. If you need a therapist, see a therapist. Even if you need medication, do it. But the thing is that a lot of issues that post JWs have, which therapy is, might address, but might not specifically address, just has to do with certain goals. Like, I want to go back to college, but I'm kind of scared to. Well, a therapist might help you with that. But the difference between that in life coaching is that therapy can go on for months and years, and maybe you might take a break and then go back for another couple of years. It can go on and on and on. Not because they're incompetent and can't fix your problem. No, they might be the best in the world, but that's just the nature of it. Believe me, I went to a therapist for all the time I was, not all the time I was in, but for a lot of the time that I was in, I went to the same therapist, and he was really, really helpful to me. He was fantastic. Um, but I would go, like some other issue would come up, and I had to go back to him because I never really quite got it figured out myself. Whereas with life coaching, the idea is that we have a particular thing that we're trying to overcome, a certain barrier to reaching a certain goal, and a coach will just listen and kind of confirm what you've said and kind of help you focus on what your goal is, what steps you need to take to. He's not going to tell you any of those things. He's just going to confirm with you what you sort of already have in your mind. And the thing is that that's going to help us to think better, so that the next time, we're done. We're done. We did 4 sessions, let's say, whatever it was, maybe 2, maybe 8, whatever. We're done. We reached our goal. We're happy. We go along our merry way. 6 months later, we have another issue that we're kind of like, oh, this is a bit of a conundrum. What should I do here? Well, let me think. I could call my life coach, which you can. That'll be fine. Or you might say, no, you know what? I think what I learned from talking to Coach whatever was that I could, if I just sort of, organize these thoughts a little bit and decide which one's more important, which ones I could actually do something about, how should I tackle that? I think I could do this myself, and you probably can. So we've learned how to think better, is what happened. So that's why I always say reach out to any number of the group has got therapists in it too, and please do use them if you need to. But if you need a life coach, there's a whole bunch of them in these various groups. So thanks for listening, and again, don't worry about independent thinking. It's a great thing. It's never going to hurt you, but avoid that learned helplessness.